welcome to another episode of Nat Chat. Today we're joined by Chris Wall from ThousandEyes, who's the partner client lead there, and Ash Georgeson, who is one of Natilik's solution architects. So welcome Chris and Ash to the podcast. How are you both today?
Very good, thank you.
Super. Great. So really excited to have you both here today to talk around the topic of network visibility, which has become quite a hot topic of recent. So just before we kick off and get stuck in, I would just thought I would get the listeners to hear a little bit about who we've got today on the podcast. So Chris, let's go with you first. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background?
Sure. Yeah, will do. Thank you very much, Claire. So hello to everyone. My name is Chris Wall, as Claire has mentioned. I am the client partner lead here at ThousandEyes for the Cisco UK and Ireland channel. As you can see, not the youngest man on the block, 35 years in the industry, predominantly networking based. Been lucky enough to sell both end user, work for resellers, distributors, and also vendors as we are now. So I like to think that I'm 25 years old with about 35 years experience. Probably not true, but really good background. And, you know, the ThousandEyes piece, just on a very personal note, I actually approached the company to get them to employ me, primarily because I just saw how compelling this technology is. And I hope you guys get a feeling for that during the course of this conversation.
Oh, brilliant. That's, great to have you on here today. So thank you. And then Ash, if you could do the same, let the listeners know a little bit about who you are and your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all, and welcome to all our listeners. And of course, having Chris on is great. So I'm a solution architect at Natilik, focusing on enterprise networking and multi-cloud technologies. I've been in the industry not quite as long as Chris, although it looks like I do. And I've sort of worked from man and boy up from the NOC, supporting various clients of all sorts of shape and size, moved into deployment, implementation, engineering across all sorts of networking technologies. And today I'm in the very fortunate position to speak to clients and really understand what their desired business outcomes are and their technology strategies, and act as an advocate for them and their IT departments within Natilik. And I really enjoy that because it means I get to develop super interesting technology solutions that meet their business outcomes. But I also spend a lot of time with our transition and manage teams and our success teams to make sure that any of these solutions that we do design and deliver to our clients does actually meet their expectations. And I guess a quick note on ThousandEyes. I first came across it, I think it was a Packet Pushers podcast, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I signed up for the trial and thought it was amazing. Implemented it at my company at the time. Got the T-shirt, which I think said something I shouldn't repeat, trace route, and I still use that for my painting and DIY today. So yeah, thanks very much for having me on.
Oh, brilliant. It does sound like we have the right people on the podcast then today, so that's good. So yeah, great. Let's get stuck in, I guess. So let's get started with thinking about, what the kind of current uses of ThousandEyes that you guys are seeing are particularly pertinent at the moment within the marketplace and with businesses.
Yeah, good question. So I'll open that up. I would say the last few years and all of the trials and tribulations that have come our way, personally and professionally, in a perverse way, have become the perfect storm for ThousandEyes. So when we talk about, what's the current use that's really pertinent, I would say the fact that organizations have, in many cases, accelerated their digital transformation strategies and activities. So, that means moving workloads to cloud. It means adopting much more SaaS, and it means increasingly, like we are all today, working from home, right? The hybrid worker dynamic. For for ThousandEyes, that manifests as the perfect storm because of this dependency on networks now that we don't own as organizations and businesses, but the access to the mission critical applications and services are now not on our networks. So we're talking about organizations that have perhaps retired old HR systems and moved to Workday, which is a SaaS application. They've retired their Microsoft Exchange and gone to 365, which is SaaS. They've retired, let's say, their dependency on expensive data center infrastructure and moved their workloads out to cloud, to AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, etc. Right? The big common factor across all of that is they're now dependent on a network called the internet that they don't own, they don't control, and they have no visibility from the tools they've been using for years. That is exactly where ThousandEyes adds the value. And I think the point there is, we've heard it referred to actually by the Packet Pushers team that Ash referred to as well in a number of other industry technical forums.
Public internet.
There you go. And ThousandEyes is considered as the Google Maps of the internet. Ultimately, it will highlight where slower routes are. It will highlight where congestion is, and allow those businesses in the context of the internet to make the appropriate changes to ensure the digital experience of their users into those applications, resources, and services that are now not on their network. So that's the use, really. That's what we're seeing, and it manifests itself in lots of ways, and we'll go through that later in the chat. Ash,
I completely echo that. So, speaking to my clients on a daily basis, it's very clear the sort of mega trends that we're seeing in the market and the transitions. Certainly, hybrid working, the move to application delivery via the cloud, via SaaS. And the move away from those traditional legacy centralized architectures, and it does boil down to the internet being the new WAN, the public WAN, as I've definitely heard it termed many times now. And I think IT have traditionally, they've had the tools to support and troubleshoot and manage infrastructures that they owned and operated. But it's a completely different ballpark now. These infrastructures are not operated or owned by IT anymore. So they need new tools to allow them to support their users and to ensure their application performance. Because it could be anything, right? It could be the last mile of the internet, middle mile, some random AWS region, a particular SaaS tenant. How do you manage that? You can't put your own server into the Office 365 tenant. So I think this is where ThousandEyes really helps, and it gives IT the tools and control that they use that traditionally they had in their own managed infrastructure, but really lacked as the trends pushed people to consume these cloud services.
Yeah, sure. So kind of gone into a little bit there about how ThousandEyes can help. But kind of what are the main challenges do you think that it helps to overcome?
Right. So, just to take that point, the biggest challenges that we see are threefold, and I'll try and be really prescriptive and condensed about what those three are. So number one's pain. Okay. Customers are a lot of our customers are in pain, and let me contextualize that, right? So if we talk about the events of early 2020, okay, the NHS moved 1 million seats of Microsoft 365 in 6 weeks to home use, right? Now, that's brilliant because it proves the flexibility, it proves the power of what the IT community can deliver and ensure that people are up working and doing what they need to do. However, what happens is those individuals' digital experience deteriorates because of all the stuff that we've just talked about. So, scale that down right down to the 1, 2, 3, 4 person organization, right? The challenge is still the same. Now we're relying on AWS. Now we're relying on a whole bunch of third-party providers, whether they're content delivery network providers, secure web gateway providers, SaaS on-ramp providers, third-party ISPs, transit ISPs. All of that stuff is now complicating that link to those services. So how does ThousandEyes help? Well, it does it in a very simple way by delivering visibility across every single hop to that target. And without going into a lot of depth, the way we do that is, in fact, I'll put a caveat in, right? Whatever it is any of the audience ever understood about network performance monitoring, application performance monitoring, etc., throw that out the window, because that's actually not what we do. We are a digital experience monitoring platform or a network intelligence platform. And the way we deliver this visibility that sounds too good to be true is that we generate synthetic user sessions and synthetic user transactions to a target. So we don't need to know how many routers, switches, links, speeds, etc. It doesn't matter. We don't care. All we're interested in is an agent, which either sits on a user's machine or within a campus environment, a branch office, regional office, whatever, and has a target, a URL or an IP address. That's it. That's all we need. That telemetry then comes because it's proactively generating synthetic user sessions, synthetic user transactions as required at a time interval suitable to the organization. What's the challenge as it comes to pain is massive reduction, like 95% reduction in mean time to resolution. So the first thing that happens is the customer knows immediately who owns the issue. They don't spend an hour, a day, a week, a month, years in some cases, trying to identify who owns the problem, because ThousandEyes will absolutely identify it within minutes, proactively. Okay? So that's kind of one. The second piece that we're really adding value in, or actually second and third, is both what we call baselining and benchmarking. So for example, if organizations want to move to more SaaS adoption, to move more workloads to cloud, we can help them baseline what that service would look like, because guess what? Different apps work in different clouds because they have different types of connections. For example, Azure, Microsoft are bringing the edge much closer to the customer, so there's not so much dependence on internet. Google, surprise, surprise, much more internet dependent. As a direct result, performance is going to change, and also exposure to digital issues is going to change, because the one thing that never changes is the internet constantly changes, minute by minute, hour by hour. It's never the same. The route to where you want to get to is never the same. Google Maps, right? And the third part of number two, if you like, is not just baselining, but benchmarking. So one of the increasing use cases we're seeing is organizations beginning to benchmark, for example, different SD-WAN providers. And you kind of look at SD-WAN and think, well, it's SD-WAN, it's the next level of wide area networking, it's using internet, it's all secure, it's guaranteed. Well, yeah, it's not guaranteed, because actually the underlay, very often the providers we will find quite often backhaul data to their own data centers, or they use very spurious routes to get to targets, which adds delay, which adds frustration. If you can see that and benchmark those different SD-WAN providers, different regions, different apps, different services, what that means is for the customers that have gone through the pain and used ThousandEyes to solve it, their next projects, they can start baselining and benchmarking, making sure that their budget money is going into the right direction, and that things are working as expected before they press the green light. So projects come in on time better, they come in on budget or ideally under, and the productivity and all of the benefits they expect from those new services are realized much quicker. Sorry, that was quite a long answer.
No, it's thorough. That was good.
I think I can summarize it as mean time to innocence.
Please do. There you go.
So I think when I used to work in ops, I used to treat troubleshooting almost as an art form. you would try and collect as much data as possible across the end-to-end stack and try and isolate that problem domain. And that would take time, right? You'd look at the OSI model and maybe you'd do the slice and dice approach and hit layer 3 first of all. Is it an end-to-end connectivity issue? That looks fine. There's no latency. There's no packet drops. There's no problem at layer 2 or layer 1. Let's look up. Are we able to establish TCP sessions? Is it something that's only impacting UDP? Do we need to go up the stack? Is it an application problem? Are we egressing some firewalls that are performing some security policy that's impacting the way the traffic's being transited? This would take a lot of time. And you would get there in the end, but being in the network team, you would always hear it's always the network, and it's down to us to prove that it isn't. A tool like ThousandEyes will bubble that up to the surface almost instantly, so you immediately define the problem domain and can assign it to the appropriate team, escalate it to the service provider. This was already quite challenging back in traditional architecture days, but expand that out into the wider context that we've previously discussed on infrastructure you don't manage. It's that's the real challenge of modern IT infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then if you factor in home environments as well, they're even more challenging. What control does IT have over somebody's home network? Not much.
Yeah, and what's also interesting as well, and this is very much the human element, just to finish off on that topic, is there's no tolerance. Right, so we're beginning to see certainly large organizations that don't give their workforce the connectivity, access, and the ability to be productive as well as they would expect. Those people start moving, they start going to other companies, so they brain drain, they lose talent, etc., etc. So for knowledge workers, this is absolutely key, right? Because they don't care. That company might be in the business of making cardboard boxes. They might be in the business of developing the latest drug to cure global pandemics or whatever it is they're in. They might not be in IT. They don't care. They're not interested. It just needs to work. So when you have something that takes away this wonderful jigsaw that Ash kind of portrayed earlier and just says, look, we don't actually care where the issue is. We don't actually care what the problem is, but here is where the issue, and now you can make a triage action to at least restore connectivity. Then we can address why that happened later. The model that Ash talked about is we kind of need to address the problem and replicate it to understand how we don't make it happen again. That was the old days, and still happens to a degree, but less so, right? So this kind of technology suits this public cloud environment way better because it says, I don't care about the cause of the problem. What we need to know is, where it is, what we can do to make sure that both our customers and employees are productive, and we can deal with how we fix that later. One of the side benefits, and a really strong commercial benefit, is it really does help customers hold their providers to task on service credits. So we've seen a number of organizations be able to prove without shadow of a doubt that providers have been below SLA, whereas before that's always been a bitter argument. This kind of helps that. So there's a lot of commercial benefit to this too.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So just to try and bring it to life a little bit, is there any kind of examples you've got where you can share ThousandEyes, kind of shining a light on ThousandEyes and how it's helped improve that experience, especially for the home worker?
Yeah, and I'm glad you've raised that. So the home worker element, hybrid worker, remote worker, whatever terminology we want to use, that's probably our fastest growing use case. For many of the reasons that we mentioned before, right? We do have a customer on board that is in the process. That in fact they are a 180,000 person organization. Currently, they have deployed just in excess of 40,000 ThousandEyes endpoint agents to their knowledge workers. This is a global consultancy firm. So by the very fact of what I just described, it narrows it down to very few. I can't name them. They're not a reference site at the moment. But these knowledge workers are revenue generators for the business. So they go to customer site and spend, short, medium, and long-term contracts on customer site. if they cannot operate, if they can't get to the systems they rely on internally, and if they can't get to the customer systems to deliver the value, they're not productive. If they're not productive, there's contention. If there's contention, there's lack of bills, lack of revenue, etc., etc. So ThousandEyes was used, or is now being used across those 40,000 plus endpoints to ensure that wherever their knowledge workers, which are the revenue generators, the consultants for this global consultancy, wherever they are, should they start experiencing any issues of getting to any particular service, any particular application, their IT team can, within minutes, fully identify, is it the machine? Is it the Wi-Fi? Is it the local area network, wide area network, internet, providers, SaaS application, whatever it is, right? And I'll give you an example. So this particular one firm was working with one of their global clients, a recruitment company, another global recruitment company, and particularly in Central Europe, they had a community of consultants, probably about 120 on site, trying to get access to this recruitment organization's Salesforce.com instance. They had great access. The customer did not. So by morphing to their customer environment, they used ThousandEyes to identify the issue for that customer. And the issue was actually some corrupt data. So the page that was causing the problem was candidate record entry. This is quite an important part of recruitment, right? Because if you can't talk about your candidates, you can't put them on, you can't generate the revenue to place those agents, right? Or those candidates. Very simply, the page that was required from Salesforce.com, an enormous amount of it was on a CDN, and 3 or 4 elements that were required to load that page, static elements like logos and fixed text, were corrupt and they didn't load. There was no script in place to say that if these elements don't load, continue to load the page. So the net result was it just stopped. So our customer identified to their customer what the issue was, and it took a DevOps guy approximately 15 minutes to just write a piece of code to say, look, if these elements don't load, continue to load the rest of the page anyway. That was the triage. And then the remedy later, because they now knew exactly what the problem was they uploaded the right relevant content that wasn't corrupt anymore. Problem done. Took matters of hours. That was catastrophic. We probably saved that customer, they believe that they were running at somewhere around about $5,000 a minute per user in lost productivity as they netted it all out. So, there's some real business gains here. So that's just one example, right?
Yeah, and a powerful one at that, I'd say. Yeah.
Ash, I'm not sure if you wanted to add to that, because I know you spend a lot of time in the field with this stuff.
Yeah, I think the point on the lost productivity is key here. And once you see the results, it's very easy to build a business case where you can see the quick return on investment, not just from the impacted knowledge workers, but also the IT ops guys, and reducing the cycles that they spend troubleshooting some of these problems. That, I guess, to give a recent example, for a client we've worked with, they're a legal firm, and as part of their pandemic response, I'm sure the same as most listeners, they kickstarted their home working strategy, and found that a lot of home workers were experiencing very poor conferencing productivity with poor quality audio and video, and given this legal firm with their lawyers, it's that's a critical part of how they communicate with their clients, and it's clearly not acceptable. The client struggled with this before they asked us for some support, and it was a simple case of deploying the ThousandEyes endpoint agents, which we literally did in an afternoon. It's ridiculously easy to automate and deploy these agents. And with that, we could build that baseline. We could use those synthetic tests to very accurately correlate that there was actually an issue with latency and jitter for this select group of problem users for traffic testing to that unified communications platform. And it just goes to the point that ThousandEyes very quickly bubbles up this information and actually showed the smoking gun, in that we could see that these users were actually traversing a VPN back to their colo, which was not the design. They should have actually been routing directly out to the internet. And I think what the guys finally found is that actually they had a couple of different DCs with separate firewalls, which should have a matched policy, but one firewall was configured slightly differently, resulting in the tunneling of this particular traffic back to the DC rather than direct internet access. So in theory, that's an easy issue to spot and fix. But as ever, these problems are intermittent. It affected different users at different times. ThousandEyes bubbled it straight to the surface immediately. But if you step back, just from the IT ops angle, what would we have done to try and troubleshoot this in the past? You're thinking about running packet captures on the users at home. That's not an easy task. Or analyzing their routing tables on their machines. We're talking a serious amount of effort to try and investigate and collect data. So this is the sort of information that ThousandEyes immediately pulls just by developing that baseline, executing those synthetic tests, all displayed nicely in a dashboard or an automated report.
Yeah.
And just to add a little bit, Ash is right on point. For the listeners out there, usually the first instance where ThousandEyes is used is primarily in unified communication as a service. So that's WebEx, it's Zoom, it's Microsoft Teams, it's BlueJeans, and we are very, very often contacted to help those customers understand why they get blocky video or clippy audio, or they can't share content or whatever it is for those calls. ThousandEyes delivers that root cause literally within minutes once it's set up. So that's usually the most popular binary case. And I think the final point I'll make on that is, I'm sure a lot of our customers have got what they call end user experience monitoring capabilities or platforms or assets, right? They're very often about how much and how much time those users are spending on certain applications and what they're doing with them. That's not what we do. What we do is we deliver a service assurance layer underneath all of that makes sure all that good stuff actually works. And if anything in that digital supply chain, user to target changes, causes degradation in user experience, that's what we flag. So I just wanted to make sure that the listeners on here just got a context of where we position in this digital experience, because it's all a bit, everyone's into digital experience. We're very clear where we're at. We're the service assurance layer underneath it all.
Yeah, and an important one at that. So those kind of examples there really bring that to life. So thank you for sharing those. So now to move on to a bit more of like a general kind of topic of visibility, with the complexity and the rise in the tools and, trying to mitigate those blind spots. So what has made visibility and monitoring and everything such, a prominent thing at the moment?
I think for a lot of what we've just discussed, but I think where you're specifically talking about is Cisco, and actually I've seen from a couple of different vendors have started talking around full stack observability, right? So in the context of ThousandEyes standalone, we talk about network intelligence, digital experience monitoring, and making sure people can get to the assets, and if they can't, we can fix that quickly. Full stack observability goes kind of a few levels up and down around the ThousandEyes piece, and it's for all of the points that we talked about. So ThousandEyes is brilliant, but it's not the answer to everything. Okay, so if you've got data center environments, either on-prem or in cloud or hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environments, we can basically highlight that might be where the issue is, but not what. Okay, so you start using technologies like the InterSights, or I think it was previously called StealthWatch, and a number of other products within the Cisco portfolio. You can use those in combination with ThousandEyes. Similarly, at the application end, specifically when it runs to customer workloads, it could be an online travels booking portal, it could be an online banking service, it could be an automotive dealership with an online booking system for their car. There's a million dependencies on the back of that in terms of APIs for payment, for booking, to connect to different apps and services to make sure that customer gets stuff booked as appropriate, has a route to payment and whatnot, right? We can identify if that's broken, but not where and why. And then in that context, you would use a technology like a true APM like App Dynamics, right? When you've got view of the data center and what's running in there, then you've got view of the applications and the deep intel that you can get from that. And you've got real linear proactive telemetry on the route to those assets. That's full stack observability. And that manifests itself in an even bigger value to the customer than ThousandEyes, right? Now, we know customers are not going to buy all that in one go, but ultimately, full stack observability is an outcome. And ultimately, what that means to the customer is not only do we have proactive observability for our apps, visibility for our networks, but we also have all that data correlating to business impact. And why is that important? It's because if I've got 6 issues, I want to know which ones are impacting my business the most, because they're going to be my Sev1 or P1s. So I will prioritize those. Stuff that doesn't have quite that level of priority or business impact, Sev2, Sev3, P1, P2, P3, right? Massively important to the customer, because now they've not got IT teams, various operation teams running around with their hair on fire going, oh my God, what are we only going to fix? It's very, very clear, right? Sev1, Sev2, Sev3, these are the impacts, get them fixed. Here's the telemetry. These are the issues. You can start drilling in and fixing that. So it's an extremely lightweight answer to that question, because it's huge. We could spend days talking about it, right? Or I could certainly, but let's leave it at that. That whole holistic combination of both observability around applications, because it's a very specific term, and visibility around networks, right? Because visibility is more a network term. Combined, full stack observability is just a massively powerful business solution when we consider all the stuff we've talked about before, that businesses are using more cloud, more SaaS, more internet, right? It's probably more critical than it's ever been. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
I agree. From my perspective and how I think clients see, we talked about digital experience monitoring. What do businesses really care about? They care about their users being able to access their applications in a performant manner and having a good experience. So that's the business outcome. But once you start to dig under that, what is that end-to-end communication from user to application? What systems does that traverse? It's not just the network, right? It is the application. It's the performance of the various aspects of that application. Understanding how microservices architecture application communicates with itself, calls to databases, the performance of that, the security of that. And if you descend through the stack, below the network, you're looking at infrastructure, hypervisors, virtualization infrastructure, storage, cloud services platforms, Kubernetes clusters. It's a bewildering array of infrastructure that is involved in the overall outcome of a user's experience, or, much of which we no longer own or operate, and there will be problems. And traditionally, IT would have standalone monitoring platforms looking at each of these in isolation. I think what full stack observability is really trying to bring to the market is contextualizing all of this and bringing it together so that we can see issues that are impacting that outcome in context with the rest of the infrastructure. And again, it comes down to providing that information quickly with the analytics to use to the IT ops team so that they can quickly troubleshoot these issues and resolve issues as quickly as possible to ensure that the impact of business is reduced as much as possible.
Yeah, and so obviously we've talked about ThousandEyes, and there's obviously different components then to the full kind of stack monitoring and observability. So moving forward, you see that as something that is a focus for businesses to be able to have that full stack.
Yeah, and it's another one of those interesting conversations that certainly I could go on for days and days and days about, because what we're facing is a step change. So let's be really clear. Full stack observability is in its infancy. In fact, as even the ThousandEyes value prop is still as a concept quite in its infancy, right? Because we're in that process of acceleration where businesses are moving much more to cloud and public service environments, right? And slowly and surely there is a realization that all of the tools that Ash mentioned before that have been so worthwhile and valuable within their controlled environments, their own local area networks and wide area network environments, they're not relevant anymore because they don't have the visibility. At best, they're going to give a red light or a green light or tell you something is or isn't working, right? That's it. Because they're not fit for purpose, because the technologies, the algorithms that they use, protocols that they use don't work beyond the confines of their network. So definitely FSO will become more and more and more of a focus for the vast majority of businesses, no question. I mean, we're talking about the world's largest organizations, but we're also talking about organizations. For example, we've got one customer with only 4 people in their organization, but they rely on in excess of 100 SaaS applications. Guess what? They're in the financial services industry. Not having connectivity to these SaaS apps is not an option because their business dies. So as a consequence, we've got a 4-person organization probably spending more on their digital experience stroke observability practice, right, than maybe a multi-billion-dollar business might, because they could still be running predominantly in their own data center environment, right? So that's where we're at. Is there's a lot of change. So it is definitely going to be something business focuses on much more, and especially as those businesses move their mission critical apps out to cloud, right? So Ash might not have seen this. We do have a facility to our partners like Natilik called a domain generator. I use this a lot to start having meaningful conversations with customers, because we can see the assets that they rely on, and increasingly we see more and more and more URLs coming back where it's very clear the customer is using AWS, they're using Azure, they're using Google Cloud, right? And that's suddenly now when this becomes a real valid conversation. If you're going to move those workloads, and let's say it's your online travel company, it's your automotive dealership, it's your online banking, and you're going to move all that stuff to cloud, not having the ability to find mean time to resolution, mean time to innocence is just not an option. So this is only going to accelerate. I just think that the challenge right now is, I think a lot of business, certainly over the last 2 years, has probably had different priorities and different thought processes to go through. As this becomes more the norm, there'll be, and don't get me wrong, we're growing at phenomenal rates, but there's just this whole hyper growth still to come into that business, because once organizations have stabilized themselves over the last couple of years with the turmoil that we've had, they're going to start making real decisions about, right, if we're going to use all this public service stuff, internet, cloud, SaaS, we're absolutely going to have this as stable, and we're going to have as good a visibility as we had prior to what we had the last 2 years. So we now need to be looking at new solutions because we now understand our current solutions don't work. So yeah, big.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, I'd like to give another example. Over at Natilik, our internal platform team actually make extensive use of full stack observability tools. And what we do is we actually host services for our clients globally, across a global infrastructure. And these are critical services. We're talking 5, 6 nines uptime, contact center as a service, managed SD-WAN, multi-cloud connectivity brokering, and our own custom developed internal and external web applications. And our platform team need to monitor not just the applications, not just the network, not just the infrastructure, all of it holistically. And they use many capabilities inherent in the FSO tools. So like BGP monitoring, for quick alerts for any upstream impacts for some of our peering partners. Our infrastructure is a mix of traditional architecture and microservices across virtualization platforms and Kubernetes, with various storage vendors on-prem and a use of various public clouds for each potential component of some of these services. We have to consume cloud services because they actually deliver something that we need. So immediately you've got quite a complex environment, and I think what FSO provides us is that correlation between all of those levels, the application, the network, the compute layer, storage, and for platform teams, DevOps teams, SRE teams, I think that's critical, because the point of DevOps and SRE is to break down the silos, to ensure that teams can be productive and that they can support these complex environments. So we need visibility tools that do the same, and I think that's why we're going to see more growth in FSO.
Yeah, no, it seems like a massive growth area, and for all the reasons that you've given throughout this podcast, you can totally understand why. So just kind of like for a final topic question for you guys. So going back to ThousandEyes, why do you think that it's such an effective tool? So I think there's kind of various integrations and bits like that. So I think you can just maybe give the listeners a little bit more insight into that side of it.
Sure. Involvement in the integration piece, but let me start by saying, if we consider what we've talked through so far on this podcast and where ThousandEyes fits, i.e., we need some compute somewhere, desktop or campus, and we need a target. Okay, so when you consider that as a concept, we need to be completely and utterly agnostic. So yes, we're a Cisco company. Yes, of course, we're going to work great with Cisco products, and increasingly more so, but it doesn't need to be Cisco. Right? We can sit on any form of compute. We can sit on things like, and I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, Juniper routers, for example, right? If there's no compute, we can sit on things like Raspberry Pis or Intel NUCs, little mini PCs. And as long as we got that target, we generate telemetry, because that telemetry goes to our SaaS cloud service. So it's there continually for our customers to keep getting that feedback. So when you consider that, right, our integration story needs to be really, really strong. So first and foremost, foundationally, is a really strong suite of extensible APIs, right? In addition, we've also delivered quite a lot of native integration into a number of different platforms, even long prior to Cisco, for example, ServiceNow. So if you go into the ThousandEyes configurations to set your agents up, the ServiceNow script is there. Cut, paste, boom, done. And it is literally, I've even done it myself, and I genuinely have. So if I can do it, I'm pretty sure anyone can do it. Similarly, I'm told, and I understand that with the APIs, we've integrated into things like ticket management systems like Splunk. We have integrated a whole bunch of other third parties. And again, I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm going to. So in the APM world, of course, we want that attached to App Dynamics, but it doesn't need to be App Dynamics. The API will allow our telemetry to present itself into pretty much any dashboard of any APM, any cloud management, any SNMP based telemetry that the customer's got, if that's the way they want to consume ThousandEyes. If they don't want to use our native feed, they just want us to be part of that single pane of glass that their IT ops look at, we can do that. Of course, there is a burgeoning integration strategy within Cisco. Pleased to say, we've done a lot in terms of actually building our agents into the Catalyst series, 9300, 9400. We've always been able to load onto Cisco ISR, ASR routers, and that strategy is going to continue, not just in the enterprise networking part of Cisco, but across the Cisco portfolio, full stop. So, watch this space. There's probably there is a multi-year strategy of integrating ThousandEyes for the reason I mentioned primarily as that foundational service assurance layer under everything that the networks are relying on.
I concur. I'd say that distributed or the decentralized monitoring isn't new. What ThousandEyes does is it elevates this through the breadth of visibility within the tool, but also with those integrations. And we've touched on some of those, whether that's looking at the full stack through infrastructure visibility tools like Intersight or App Dynamics, like further up the stack, so we can get that full stack visibility, but also other aspects like the internet insights, where we can get a global view of the SaaS, PaaS provider level visibility, and some of the newer announcements like the SD-WAN insights. It's almost like it's too much visibility, if that could even be a thing.
You just need customers to buy it, Ash.
But with the SD-WAN insights, I find this quite fascinating, because when software-defined networking first came to market, one of the sort of dreams and the vision was to have almost like a closed loop capability, where we'd have a feedback loop of the experience, the digital experience that users are having, aligned to business outcomes, feeding that back into driving the actual network policy and configuration. And I guess some of the challenges we've seen with SD-WAN is, is it making the right policy choices? Is the application aware routing sending traffic where it should? Should we be routing locally? Should we be tunneling back to a cloud on-ramp or back to the SIG? That's a challenge for people. So I'm quite excited to see how the SD-WAN insights can close that loop. So yeah, I'm sort of interested to see any experience that ThousandEyes have had with that, and whether that's been deployed.
Right now, the answer to that question is no. It hasn't been deployed. We talked about it. We're demonstrating it. It's actually not a GA product yet, but it is up. It is running, and like you say, great telemetry. Real insights. but also that predictive capability. So it starts being able to really generate an output that says you can refine this, or as your workload or traffic increases, you can start to consider these things. So there's no nasty surprises, but we're limiting the nasty surprise that might come to the customer because they're going to be forewarned, forearmed. So no, it's a GA product, I think scheduled for early next calendar year, Ash. But yeah, it's an exciting one. It's a bit of a game changer. I think it might be a little bit too much for a lot of people to take in the first instance. But yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
Fantastic.
You heard it here first, guys. It's exciting things to come. I know that's really great. So thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. It's been really interesting, for me, and I'm sure the listeners, to hear kind of, how ThousandEyes is helping businesses, how they'll help them even more in the future, and how it integrates in that full stack observability piece is just really interesting. So thank you. It's also been really good to hear kind of a few kind of real life stories and seeing how that actually plays out within a real life business, because I think that's when you really see the power of it.
Yeah.
So just in terms of next steps, for anyone who is, been listening today, struggling with their visibility, they want to know more, then, Natilik is here, as a ThousandEyes partner to help. So what we're offering is like a proof of value, which can get you started. So really it's just, we'll pop a link in the notes on the podcast episode. So if you want to know more, if you want to get in touch with us, just click through there, and we can take it from there. So that would be great if you get in touch. We'd really love to speak to you. So I guess that's everything for now. Thank you again, guys. Thanks, Chris and Ash. You've both been brilliant today. So
Thanks for having me.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure, Claire. Thanks for your time and thanks for the opportunity.
Super. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks.